Judge targets JD Vance and Whoopi Goldberg's lawsuit, stunned by his legal masterstroke. The pale dawn light sliced through the blinds of JD Vance's modest apartment in Columbus, Ohio, jolting the 38-year-old senator awake at 5 a.m. There was no Senate hearing today, but a trial loomed, a lawsuit filed by none other than Whoopi Goldberg. The alarm blared, but Vance was already out of bed, a stack of legal documents casting a long shadow on his desk. A tailored suit, contrasting to his usual casual attire, hung pressed and ready. A recent, fiery speech denouncing Hollywood's progressive agenda had ignited a firestorm. Goldberg, the outspoken star of The View, was suing him for a staggering $10 million, alleging defamation and irreparable reputational damage. Vance, a man forged in the crucible of Appalachia, hardened by Marine service, and armed with a Yale Law degree, refused to back down. He wasn't intimidated. Standing before the mirror, running a hand through his close-cropped hair, his jaw set like granite, he muttered, "They think they can silence me? They're about to learn a lesson." He grabbed a steaming mug of black coffee, the bitter aroma filling the small space. His phone buzzed, a senior Senate colleague urging him to reconsider, to settle. He scowled. "This isn't just about me," he growled. "It's a stand against the woke mob." This was more than personal. It was a battle against Judge Edward Grayson, notorious for rulings that seemed to systematically favor the left. Before we dive into the heart of this David versus Goliath battle, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss the latest explosive stories. JD Vance pushed open the imposing courtroom doors, the click of his polished dress shoes echoing on the polished marble floor. A palpable tension hung in the air as he entered. His gaze, sharp and unwavering, swept across the throng, reporters, Trump supporters, and of course, a contingent of The View fans, their faces a mixture of anticipation and hostility. He placed his meticulously organized stack of documents on the defendant's table, ready to face the gauntlet. Judge Edward Grayson, a 63-year-old man with a mane of silver hair and piercing, ice-blue eyes framed by steel-rimmed glasses, perched above the room, surveying the scene with an almost predatory intensity. 30 years on the bench had carved deep lines into his face, each one seemingly etched with a liberal conviction. Vance knew this well. This was going to be a fight. "All rise!" the bailiff bellowed, his voice cracking the silence. Grayson entered, radiating an aura of unassailable authority. The gavel slammed down, its sharp report echoing like a gunshot. "We are here for Goldberg versus Vance," he announced, his voice resonating with an almost dismissive quality. "Plaintiff, proceed." Whoopi Goldberg, draped in an elegant black dress that couldn't quite mask the simmering rage in her eyes, rose, flanked by her lead attorney, Daniel Hirsch, a titan of high-profile litigation. Hirsch began smoothly, his voice dripping with practiced sincerity. "Your Honor, my client, Miss Whoopi Goldberg, has suffered grievous harm as a direct result of the defendant JD Vance's reckless and malicious statements. His outrageous claim during a Senate press conference, that Hollywood and extremist TV shows do not deserve funding, was a thinly veiled personal attack on The View and Miss Goldberg's hard-earned reputation. We have irrefutable evidence, canceled ad contracts, plummeting revenue, and damages totaling no less than $10 million. Goldberg fixed Vance with a glare that could curdle milk, her voice trembling with barely suppressed fury. "I have dedicated my entire life to building a career, to using my platform to speak truth. And he, a jumped-up senator, dares to tear it all down with a few inflammatory words." A murmur rippled through the audience, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably. Grayson nodded, scribbling furiously, clearly swayed by the plaintiff's opening salvo. He turned to Vance, his gaze narrowed and icy. "Defendant, do you have anything to say, or is this just another right-wing publicity stunt?" Vance rose, his tall frame radiating quiet confidence. His blue suit, impeccably tailored, gave him an air of unexpected authority. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm and measured, "I am representing myself today because this case is about far more than personal grievances. It is about fundamental legal principles. My statement was a constitutionally protected expression of public opinion, made in my capacity as a senator. It was not a targeted attack on Miss Goldberg or any individual." He held up a thick file. "I have meticulously documented evidence from the briefing to support this." Grayson cut him off, his voice dripping with contempt. "Mr. Vance, this is not a Senate hearing room for you to grandstand. I want legal arguments, not political rhetoric." His tone was laced with undisguised hostility. A reporter in the back row whispered to a colleague, "He's got it out for him, no doubt." Vance remained composed, pressing on. "Your Honor, the law unequivocally protects free speech under the First Amendment. New York Times versus Sullivan established a clear precedent. Public opinions cannot be considered defamation without irrefutable evidence of malice. I challenge the plaintiff to produce such evidence." Hirsch shot to his feet, his face flushed with indignation. "We have social media posts and tweets from the View's audience viciously criticizing Ms. Goldberg after Mr. Vance's statement. That is a direct and demonstrable impact." Grayson nodded, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "I will consider it. But Mr. Vance, are you here with the confidence of a seasoned attorney, or just a politician playing lawyer?" He smirked, and a few scattered chuckles echoed through the courtroom. Vance's fist clenched beneath the table, but his face remained an impassive mask. "Your Honor, I hold a law degree from Yale University, and I have significant real-world experience. I am here to defend the truth, not to be subjected to mockery." He attempted to present his file, containing the official briefing transcript, but Grayson raised a dismissive hand. "Enough! I do not have time for irrelevant material. You are wasting this court's time." He brought down the gavel with a resounding thud, his voice rising in anger. "This blatant disregard for procedure constitutes contempt of court. I fine you $1,000. Do you have anything to say, Mr. Vance?" The courtroom fell into stunned silence. A journalist scribbled furiously in his notepad. "The judge just went nuclear." Vance took a deliberate, steadying breath, his eyes blazing with controlled fury, but his voice remained remarkably calm. "Your Honor, I respect this court, but I respectfully request that you review the evidence before rendering a judgment. I have a fundamental right to present my case." Grayson smirked, a cruel glint in his eyes. "Your rights do not include challenging my authority. Sit down." He turned to Hirsch, his voice softening noticeably. "Plaintiff, proceed." Hirsch grinned triumphantly, presenting a barrage of data on the View's alleged revenue losses, placing the full blame squarely on JD Vance. Whoopi nodded, her eyes locked on Vance, a silent message of, "You're finished," etched on her face. But Vance didn't flinch. He quietly and meticulously noted every word Grayson uttered, every interruption, every instance of undisguised favoritism toward Whoopi. A reporter whispered, "He's not giving up. Not a chance." Meanwhile, Court Clerk Helen Carter typed with a grimace, recognizing Grayson's overreach but bound by her position. As Hirsch wrapped up his presentation, Grayson gave Vance a final, withering look. "You have 5 minutes to rebut before I issue a preliminary ruling. Do not waste my time again." He slammed the gavel, asserting absolute control. But JD Vance remained unshaken. JD Vance stood tall, his grip tightening on his pen, his laser-like focus fixed on Judge Edward Grayson. 5 minutes to rebut after being slapped with a $1,000 contempt of court fine, a blatant attempt to silence him. But JD Vance wasn't built to be silenced. He inhaled deeply, his voice cutting through the suffocating silence with the force of a hammer blow. "Your Honor, I will not waste anyone's time. I am here to defend the truth, and I demand fair consideration, something I have been conspicuously denied thus far." Grayson raised a sardonic eyebrow, gavel clutched in his hand as if poised to interrupt. But Vance didn't give him the chance. "First, let me reiterate, my press briefing statement was a constitutionally protected expression of public opinion, as affirmed by New York Times versus Sullivan in 1964. That landmark ruling established that to prove defamation, the plaintiff must demonstrate actual malice, that I knowingly lied or acted with reckless disregard for the truth. Does the plaintiff have such evidence?" He turned to Daniel Hirsch, Whoopi's lawyer, his gaze a challenge. Hirsch fumbled, frantically flipping through his papers. "We have tweets from viewers and demonstrable revenue losses." Vance smiled faintly, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Tweets from viewers are not proof of my malice. That's a public reaction, not my intent." The audience buzzed with murmurs. A reporter scribbled, "He's turning the tables." Grayson slammed his gavel. "Mr. Vance, do not lecture me on the law. I have presided over cases before you were born." But Vance stood his ground, his voice firm and unwavering. "Your Honor, I am not lecturing. I am asking you to apply the law fairly. I have the briefing recording that irrefutably proves my statement was not aimed at Miss Goldberg, or anyone specifically." He pulled his phone from his pocket, holding it aloft. I respectfully request permission to play this recording for the court's review. Grayson's face flushed crimson, his voice cracking with anger. This is not a theater for your audio show. I will not allow it. But Vance pressed on, his tone calm yet laced with steel. Your Honor, denying me the right to present crucial evidence is a direct violation of my Sixth Amendment right to a fair trial. I have the right to present my case, and I will not allow anyone, including you, to obstruct it. The room erupted in whispers. Helen Carter, the court clerk, stopped typing, her eyes wide with shock. A journalist muttered, "He just openly defied him." Grayson slammed his gavel even harder, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. "You are crossing the line, Mr. Vance. I could increase the fine." But Vance didn't relent. He set his phone down deliberately, pulling another file from his bag, pre-printed legal precedents. Your Honor, I am not relying solely on rhetoric. This is the Falwell v. Flint ruling from 1988, which definitively affirmed that public opinions, even controversial ones, cannot be considered defamation without specific proof of falsehood. Ms. Goldberg must prove that I knew her show was extremist and intentionally sought to smear her, which they have demonstrably failed to do. He held up the file. I formally request that this precedent be entered into the record. Hirsch leaped to his feet, sputtering. Objection! He's not a licensed attorney. He cannot make that request. But Vance turned to him, his gaze like a glacier. I have every right to self-represent, as guaranteed by Farad v. California in 1975. I do not need a license to defend myself in this courtroom. Grayson gritted his teeth, visibly cornered. He glanced at Whoopi as if seeking guidance, but she sat still, her eyes narrowed, watching Vance with a newfound respect. Vance continued, his voice growing stronger, resonating with conviction. Furthermore, I have evidence of bias in these proceedings. He pulled a small device from his pocket, a hidden recorder, and pressed play. Grayson's voice echoed through the courtroom. Are you here with the confidence of a seasoned attorney, or just a politician playing lawyer? The implied smirk hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. A collective gasp swept through the audience. Someone yelled, "He said that?" Vance stopped the recording, staring directly at Grayson. Your Honor, these words reveal that you prejudged me from the very beginning, based solely on my political affiliation. I formally request that you recuse yourself, as mandated by the Federal Judicial Code, Section 455, regarding judicial impartiality. The courtroom exploded. Reporters snapped photos. The audience buzzed with a cacophony of voices. Grayson pounded his gavel repeatedly, his face a mask of apoplectic rage. Silence! I demand silence! But his voice trembled, losing its initial authority. Mr. Vance, you are accusing me, a judge with 30 years of experience, of bias. This is an unprecedented insult. Vance replied, his tone cold but unwavering. Not an insult, Your Honor. It is the truth. I have a right to a fair trial, and I will not allow bias to corrupt it. Whoopi leaned in to whisper to Hirsch, her voice laced with grudging admiration. He's better than I thought. Hirsch shook his head, his face pale. We need to counter him, but he's too quick. Grayson took a deep, ragged breath, struggling to regain his composure. Mr. Vance, I will not recuse myself based on baseless claims. However, I will adjourn this hearing to review your evidence, only because I wish to bring this matter to a swift conclusion. He slammed the gavel down with a final, desperate show of force, then rose and stormed out of the courtroom, his black robe billowing behind him. Vance sat still, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He knew he'd scored a significant victory. The audience regarded him differently now, no longer the brash politician Grayson had dismissed, but a formidable legal force, turning the tide with every carefully chosen word. A reporter whispered to a colleague, He just made Grayson sweat bullets. This is going to be everywhere. Helen Carter glanced at Vance, offering a barely perceptible nod of respect. At the plaintiff's bench, Whoopi crossed her arms, her eyes reflecting a mixture of surprise and irritation. She hadn't anticipated that Vance, whom she viewed as an arrogant outsider, would transform the courtroom into his stage. Hirsch flipped frantically through his papers, desperately searching for a counterattack, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead. Vance knew Grayson wouldn't back down easily, but he'd planted seeds of doubt in everyone's minds. As the trial adjourned, Judge Edward Grayson's gavel still echoing in the chamber, Vance stepped into the courthouse hallway. Shafts of sunlight streamed through the arched windows, illuminating his impeccably tailored suit, and emphasizing his resolute posture. "Mr. Vance?" A familiar voice cut through the din. He turned to find Whoopi Goldberg striding toward him, her expression a mixture of curiosity and defiance. At her side, Daniel Hirsch clutched his briefcase like a shield, bracing himself for another round. The hallway was deserted save for them, the two adversaries poised for a showdown. "I didn't expect you to be this prepared," Whoopi began, a hint of sarcasm lacing her voice. "But do you honestly think your little recordings and legal precedents will erase the damage you've done?" Vance stood his ground, unflinching. "Miss Goldberg, I did not set out to cause you personal harm. My comments concern policy, not personality. If you took offense, that was not my intention, and the law is on my side." His gaze remained locked on hers, unyielding. Whoopi crossed her arms, a wry smile playing on her lips. "Policy? Don't play coy. You knew the view represents everything you rail against. You targeted me, people like me, who fought for a voice." Her voice rose, infused with the anger of someone who had battled prejudice for decades. Vance took a deep breath, responding with the same measured resolve he displayed in the courtroom. "You are free to believe what you wish, but the law does not operate on feelings. I am defending free speech, something from which you have also benefited. If I remain silent, we all risk losing the right to speak freely, even when our views are unpopular." His words gave Whoopi pause. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowed, as if re-evaluating him. "You're smart," she said slowly, "but you don't understand the cost of words like that. I've lost contracts. Fans have turned away because of you." Vance closed the distance between them, his voice low but firm. "You lost contracts because of market forces, not because of me. I have the data from the briefing, not a single word mentioned you or the view. You're personalizing this, but that's not how I operate." Whoopi fell silent for a moment as if struck by a previously unnoticed vulnerability. Hirsch cut in, his voice sharp. "We will prove the financial impact next session. You won't get away with this." But Vance turned to him, his gaze icy. "Go ahead and try. I'll be ready." Hirsch retreated, clearly unwilling to engage in a confrontation. Whoopi looked back at Vance, a twitch of a smile playing on her lips, not a friendly smile, but a begrudging acknowledgement. "You've got guts," she conceded. "I don't like you, but I respect the fight." The exchange ended as Hirsch pulled Whoopi away, whispering frantically about their next strategy. Vance watched them disappear around the corner, the tension slowly ebbing away. This unscheduled meeting had provided him with a new understanding of his adversary, not just an ideological opponent, but someone fighting for her own deeply held beliefs, however misguided. Stepping out of the courthouse, he was immediately swarmed by reporters, microphones thrust in his face. "Mr. Vance, you just took on the judge and Whoopi Goldberg. How does it feel?" Vance paused, a weary smile gracing his lips. "I didn't take on anyone. I simply defended the truth." His brief answer ignited a media firestorm. His phone buzzed incessantly, texts from colleagues, friends, even strangers. The hashtag Vance Legal Genius began trending online, praising his courtroom coup. Settling into his car, Vance scrolled through the torrent of tweets. One caught his eye. JD Vance just made Grayson look like a fool. He's a true legal titan. He smirked but refused to let the accolades distract him. A message from a Senate leader popped up. Good show. But be warned, they'll come back swinging. Vance nodded to himself, setting his phone down. He knew Grayson and Whoopi wouldn't surrender easily. But that impromptu hallway confrontation had given him an edge, not just legally, but strategically. In a secluded cafe near the courthouse, Whoopi sat opposite Hirsch, nursing a glass of water, her expression thoughtful. He's no pushover, she admitted, her voice low. Hirsch nodded grimly. We need more compelling evidence, or he'll win this thing. Whoopi gazed out the window, the sunlight reflecting off her somber face. I don't care about winning anymore, she murmured, but I refuse to let him think he can run roughshod over me. Both fell silent, acutely aware that the battle was far from over. After a tense 30-minute recess, the trial resumed. Judge Edward Grayson was nowhere to be seen. Vance's relentless counterattack, the damning recordings, the accusations of bias, had forced his recusal under intense pressure from the Judicial Council. Taking his place was Judge Margaret Ellis, a middle-aged woman with short brown hair and penetrating eyes, known throughout the legal community for her unwavering fairness. Vance released a silent sigh of relief. This was his chance to fight on a level playing field. The audience was even larger now, reporters packed shoulder to shoulder, cameras poised to capture every pivotal moment. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Ellis entered, her black robe flowing behind her, and struck the gavel. "I have reviewed the records and evidence from the prior sessions," she said in a calm, measured tone. "We will now proceed with final arguments. Plaintiff, you may begin." Daniel Hirsch rose, attempting to regain his footing after Vance's stunning rebuttal. He brandished a stack of papers, his voice strained. "Your Honor, we present newly acquired data showing that the View's revenue plummeted 15% following Mr. Vance's defamatory statements, accompanied by hundreds of venomous tweets from viewers criticizing Ms. Goldberg. This constitutes clear and irrefutable evidence of financial and reputational harm. Mr. Vance must be held accountable." Whoopi sat beside Hirsch, her gaze fixed on Vance, her face a mask of cold calculation. She nodded emphatically as he finished, underscoring the gravity of their claims. Ellis meticulously took notes, then turned to Vance. "Defendant, your response." Vance rose, his voice ringing with renewed confidence. "Your Honor, I have a great deal to say, and I will demonstrate, beyond any reasonable doubt, that this lawsuit is utterly without merit." He held up his files. "First, let's establish the proper context for my statements. I have obtained the complete briefing record, not just a selectively edited audio recording, but the official White House transcripts." He placed a hefty stack of documents on the table. "My comment regarding extremist TV shows not deserving federal funding was made during a broad discussion about the federal budget. It was not directed at The View, nor was it aimed at Ms. Goldberg personally. I have the sworn testimony of 3 independent witnesses, 2 respected journalists, and a White House aide, confirming that I never mentioned her or her show by name. The plaintiff must prove malice, as dictated by New York Times versus Sullivan. They cannot." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. A reporter scribbled, "He's demolishing them with the law again." Hirsch leaped to his feet. "Objection! He cannot introduce new witnesses without prior notification." But Ellis raised a hand, silencing him. "I will allow it. Proceed, Mr. Vance." Vance nodded, drawing out another document. "Second, about the alleged financial harm, I possess Nielsen ratings data which definitively shows that the View's ratings were in decline for 6 months before my statements, not after. The purported revenue drop is simply part of an existing downward trend, not a direct consequence of my actions. The plaintiff is attempting to exaggerate the impact to deflect blame." He slammed the data down on the table, his eyes daring Hirsch to challenge his assertions. Whoopi leaned over, whispering fiercely to Hirsch, her face briefly contorted with frustration. Hirsch countered weakly. "But the tweets demonstrate a direct connection," Vance retorted, his voice like a whiplash. "Tweets are not legally admissible evidence of my intent. They reflect public emotion, not concrete facts. The Falwell v. Flint ruling states that public opinions cannot be held liable for the emotional reactions of others." Ellis nodded almost imperceptibly, visibly swayed by Vance's meticulous reasoning. He pressed on, his voice growing in strength and conviction. "Finally, let us be clear, this lawsuit is not about the law, it's about raw politics. Ms. Goldberg and her legal team seek to punish me for my role in the Senate, but the law must not be bent to serve personal feelings or political agendas. It must be grounded in verifiable facts. I formally request that this court dismiss this frivolous case, as the plaintiff has utterly failed to meet the burden of proof required under federal law." He sat down, his hands resting lightly on the table, his gaze unwavering as he locked eyes with Judge Ellis. The room fell silent, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of Helen Carter's keyboard. Hirsch flipped through his papers, desperately searching for a rebuttal, sweat dripping from his forehead. Whoopi crossed her arms, her expression a complex blend of disappointment and grudging admiration. Ellis carefully reviewed Vance's meticulously presented documents, then looked up, her gaze piercing. "I have heard enough," she declared, her voice low but carrying the weight of authority. "Based on the evidence and legal precedents presented, I find that the plaintiff has not proven actual malice under the established Sullivan standard. Mr. Vance's statement was an expression of public opinion, not a targeted attack on Ms. Goldberg personally. Furthermore, about the alleged financial harm, the data presented offers no conclusive evidence of a direct causal link. Therefore, I am compelled to dismiss this case." The courtroom erupted. The audience applauded. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed relentlessly. Vance exhaled slowly, the corners of his lips tilting upward in a subtle smile. Ellis banged her gavel, demanding order. Additionally, I am compelled to acknowledge Judge Grayson's biased conduct in the previous session. This matter will be reported to the Judicial Council for a thorough investigation. She rose and exited the courtroom, leaving the echo of Vance's victory lingering in the air. Whoopi stood, casting one final, appraising look at Vance before leaving with Hirsch. No words were exchanged, but her eyes seemed to acknowledge that she had underestimated her opponent. Hirsch muttered under his breath, "We're out of options." But Whoopi remained silent, stepping out with a pensive expression. Vance gathered his documents, a mixture of relief and pride washing over him. A reporter rushed up, microphone in hand. "Mr. Vance, you just won a major victory. How does it feel?" He turned, smiling faintly. "I wasn't seeking a victory. I was seeking justice, and I believe that has been served." Grayson sat slumped in his chambers, watching the news on a small, flickering screen. Headlines flashed. Judge Grayson faces ethics probe after JD Vance exposes bias. He switched off the television, his hands trembling. He knew his career was hanging by a thread, all triggered by the moment he dismissed that young man in the blue suit. JD Vance's black sedan pulled away from the courthouse, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the streets of Washington. Inside, he held his phone, scrolling through a deluge of texts and alerts. JD Vance beats Whoopi Goldberg. Wasn't just a personal triumph, it had become a national media phenomenon. The hashtag VanceLegalGenius topped social media trends, with tens of thousands of posts hailing him as a champion of free speech. One tweet stood out. JD Vance just schooled the system. Never underestimate a man who knows the law. Not everyone celebrated. Progressive pundits slammed him, branding him an arrogant conservative who had exploited outdated laws to secure an unjust victory. One viral post claimed that he had triumphed because of privilege, not justice. As Vance entered the Senate building, he was greeted like a conquering hero. Colleagues clapped him on the back, congratulating him on averting a major political scandal. President Trump called him directly, his voice booming over the speakerphone. "JD, you're a star. Nobody could have done what you did today." Vance smiled, replying, "Thank you, Mr. President. But it's not just about winning. It's about principle." Trump chuckled heartily. "Principle or not, you shut the opposition up. Keep it up." The call ended, but Vance knew the pressure was only intensifying. News spread like wildfire. Major networks, CNN and Fox News, raced to cover the story from their biased perspectives. Vance set his phone down, his mind racing. This victory wasn't just about him and Whoopi. It had ignited a much larger debate. That night on The View, Whoopi Goldberg addressed the case. She sat among her co-hosts, her gaze subdued, and spoke slowly into the microphone. "I lost the case today, and I won't pretend I'm happy about it. But I have to give credit where it's due. JD Vance is a formidable opponent. He knows how to use the law to his advantage, even if I vehemently disagree with his views." The audience applauded tentatively, but Whoopi raised her hand to silence them. "This doesn't mean I'm backing down. I will continue to fight for what I believe in. But he earned my respect." Whoopi's reluctant admission spread quickly, easing tensions between the opposing sides but surprising many viewers. An online comment read, "Whoopi just bowed down to Vance. Who saw that coming?" Meanwhile, Vance refused to rest on his laurels. He seized the opportunity to push for systemic change. In an urgent meeting with Senate Legal Counsel, he proposed comprehensive reforms to how judges are selected and how bias is addressed in the courtroom. Judge Grayson's case is not an isolated incident. It's symptomatic of a deeply flawed system, he argued. A senior counselor frowned. "Are you sure you want to make this a full-blown crusade? It could backfire spectacularly," Vance replied firmly. "If we don't act now, who will? I witnessed the system fail firsthand. We have a moral imperative to fix it." His idea gained rapid traction. A week later, the Senate announced a bipartisan initiative mandating greater transparency in federal judge appointments and requiring mandatory bias training for all judicial staff. Vance faced the press, declaring, "Courts must serve justice, not personal agendas. I never want anyone, conservative or liberal, to face the kind of bias I experienced." His words won some acclaim but also ignited fresh controversy. A progressive commentator tweeted, "Vance is cynically using this as a smokescreen to advance the conservative agenda." Others, however, recognized the genuine potential for lasting change. The legal community was stunned. The American Bar Association convened an emergency seminar, inviting Vance to be the keynote speaker. Standing before hundreds of lawyers, he delivered a passionate address. "The law is a tool for truth, not a weapon for prejudice. My case wasn't just about defending myself, it was about safeguarding everyone's right to a fair trial." The crowd erupted in thunderous applause. A young law student whispered to a friend, "He's the kind of lawyer I aspire to be." The speech video went viral, racking up millions of views and cementing Vance's status as a new icon of legal reform. Meanwhile, Judge Grayson faced severe repercussions. The Judicial Council launched a formal investigation, uncovering a disturbing pattern of biased complaints against him. One evening, Grayson appeared on national television, his voice heavy with remorse. "I failed to recognize the impact of my own biases until Mr. Vance exposed them. I sincerely apologize for undermining the public's trust in our justice system." His public apology stunned viewers but paved the way for a deeper national conversation about judicial accountability. Online, the debate raged on. One post declared, "JD Vance is the future of law, young, brilliant, fearless." Another countered, "He's just Trump's puppet. Don't be fooled by the rhetoric." Love him or hate him, no one could deny that JD Vance had single-handedly shaken the foundations of the American legal system. From the Senate chamber to the View studios, from the quiet chambers of the courthouse to the raucous streets, his name had become synonymous with an unprecedented legal revolution. He knew the repercussions wouldn't cease, and he was ready. Morning light spilled through the tall windows as JD Vance sat in the Senate hearing room, a fresh stack of documents in hand. His judicial reform initiative had been formally endorsed, and he was ready to present the next phase. He stood, his voice resolute. "We need fairness in the system," he began. "My case proved bias can seep into any courtroom." The advisors nodded, but some were skeptical. One said, "Is this costly venture going too far?" Vance set his files down. "If we don't act now, the system will continue failing those who cannot fight back. I want bias training for all judges and court staff, plus oversight to review all rulings." Within days, the first training program launched. Dozens of judges and lawyers filled the hall. On stage, Vance stood by an unlikely figure, Edward Grayson, the judge who had once opposed him. After resigning amidst the scandal, Grayson sought redemption. "I was wrong to let bias sway me," he said. "Mr. Vance opened my eyes, and I'm here to help you avoid my mistakes." The audience sat in stunned silence, then offered a polite applause. A rare respect formed between former foes. As Grayson shared how to spot bias, Vance felt a surge of relief. His efforts weren't wasted. Other states soon followed suit. As a young Ohio lawyer tweeted, "Thanks to JD Vance, we're doing law better." The reforms made an impact. Meanwhile, Vance became a young hero. At Yale Law School, his talk on law and justice rang out. "Challenge the system." The students applauded wildly. The new oversight system also took shape. A diverse panel reviewed rulings, finding that 12% showed bias. Reading the report in his office, Vance was satisfied. "This is just the start," he said to himself. The media covered every move. One article read, "JD Vance is rewriting justice." But some still opposed him, protesting outside the Senate. Vance's reforms are just a cover for conservative policy. Looking out the window, Vance knew change faced resistance, and he was ready. In a surprise twist, Whoopi Goldberg mentioned Vance on The View again. "I don't agree with him," she said. "But what he's doing for the courts, it matters." Her words resonated, painting Vance as someone who crossed political lines. As his reforms spread, Vance received letters from across the country. One, pinned on his wall next to Grayson's fine, gave him hope. "You gave me hope that the law can change." Looking out the window, Vance knew his journey had just begun. As Caroline Leavitt. In today's highly polarized America, where opposing sides often clash in the public sphere, the lessons to be learned from the courtroom clash between the political conservative JD Vance and the liberal media personality Whoopi Goldberg extend far beyond the realm of law and offer a set of highly relevant principles that can be applied to our daily lives. When confronted with injustice or adversity, the first and most important step is to gather factual evidence and understand the precise nature of your rights, just as JD Vance did in preparation for his legal battle. The courtroom battle was not merely about personal animosity. It was a clash of principles, of differing ideologies. It was a battle for the system. To shift systemic opinions and practices, it is essential to prepare meticulously, rely on verifiable information rather than emotions, and maintain an unwavering respect for the fundamental tenets of the system. A society that prizes fair debate and truth. As JD Vance once famously said, "Real change takes time and is built on factual argument, not on emotion or political bias." I hope that you will choose to subscribe to this channel as we continue to explore the most gripping accounts of the pursuit of truth. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video with more amazing stories of our shared humanity.